Help wondering what would have happened if King would have been exposed at the time. The cries of hypocrisy would have blighted the son. A minister, a civil rights leader, a married man, a father. Yeah, those are good questions. Why is this man such a hypocrite? The result would be the hideous destruction of a great man. How can you destroy a great man just by shining the light on the fact that he is committing adultery with prostitutes in every place? Well, I just don't think any of that's true. That's just a bunch of scuttlebutt. Right. Yeah, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the FBI, the Senate, they're all just creating this elaborate conspiracy theory. No, even his friends admitted it. Listen to this. Ralph David Abernathy, which is one of his fellow reverends that he ran with. He said in his 1989 autobiography, "And the Walls Come Tumbling Down," that Martin Luther King engaged in extramarital affairs, evidence of which was sometimes recorded by the FBI through hotel room bugs. This is his buddy in the civil rights movement, Reverend Ralph Abernathy. Here's a quote from his book. "I remember in particular a stay at the Willard Hotel in Washington, where they not only put in audio receivers, but video equipment as well. Then after collecting enough of this evidence to be useful, they began to distribute it to reporters, law officers, and other people in a position to hurt us. Finally, when no one would do Hoover's dirty work for him, someone in the FBI put together a tape of highly intimate moments and sent them to Martin. Unfortunately, and perhaps this was deliberate, his wife Coretta received the tape and played it first. Such accusations never seemed to touch her. She rose above all the petty attempts to damage their marriage by refusing to even entertain such thoughts." Right, just those petty attempts. Those petty attempts to hurt someone's marriage, like when you send them a cassette tape of their husband committing adultery with hundreds of different people in hotel rooms across America. Just little stuff like that doesn't really matter anyway. She didn't let little stuff like that get her down. What a wonderful wife. I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm living in the Twilight Zone. Now, you might ask yourself as I'm preaching this sermon, why was the FBI eavesdropping on Martin Luther King Jr.? And the answer is because of him being connected with communists.
Civil rights activist Bayard Rustin served as King's main advisor and mentor in the late 1950s. He had joined the Young Communist League in 1936 and continued working with the Communist Party USA until the early 1940s. Following directions from the Soviet Union, the Communist Party USA and its members were active in the civil rights movement for African Americans. Following Stalin's theory of nationalism, the Communist Party USA, or CPUSA, once favored the creation of a separate nation for blacks to be located in the south of the United States. However, after 1941, when Germany invaded the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin ordered the CPUSA to abandon civil rights work and focus on getting the U.S. to enter World War II. Disillusioned, Rustin began working with members of the Socialist Party instead. Rustin was a homosexual who was arrested in Pasadena in 1953 for committing sodomy in a car with two other men. He pleaded guilty to the crime of sex perversion and served 60 days in jail as a punishment.
Now, those were the good old days when sodomy was a crime. In 1953, even in California, he was arrested for sodomy. And notice, he was an advisor and mentor. He was the main advisor and mentor to Martin Luther King Jr. in the late 50s. When was he arrested and convicted of sodomy? In the early 50s. When is he the main advisor and mentor of Martin Luther King Jr.? In the late 50s. So Martin Luther King Jr. has with him this known former communist and homosexual as his main mentor and advisor in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
Another of King's most trusted advisors was a Jewish New York lawyer named Stanley Levison, who was a leader of the Communist Party USA in the 1950s. Yet another of King's advisors and director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was Jack Odell. During the 1950s, Jack Odell was a member of the Communist Party USA. Both President John F. Kennedy and Attorney General Robert Kennedy tried to persuade Martin Luther King to separate himself from the known communists in his organization, but he would not heed the warning.
On October 10th, 1963, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy authorized the Federal Bureau of Investigation to begin wiretapping the telephones of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Kennedy believed that one of King's closest advisors was a top-level member of the American Communist Party. And look, this wasn't some right-wing conservative that said, let's wiretap Martin Luther King Jr. It was Robert Kennedy. The Kennedys were liberal. And even they said, we need to wiretap Martin Luther King Jr. because of this communist connection, but they ended up getting all this smut and filth of his wickedness and adulteries. Here's what a woman named Julia Brown, who was a communist in Cleveland for 9 years, said. We were told to promote King, to unite Negroes and whites behind him, and to turn him into a sort of national hero. We were to look to King as the leader in this struggle, the communists said, because he was on our side. While in the party, I learned that King attended a communist training school, that several of his aides were communists, and that he received funds from communists and took directions from them. He was one of their biggest heroes. Look, it's a fact. He attended the Highlander Folk School, which was a communist training school. These are facts. He was a communist. He was a pervert. He was an adulterer. He was a false prophet. But other than that, he was a great guy. Think about that, man. It doesn't make any sense. So eventually, we all know how Martin Luther King Jr. met his end. He was assassinated. The assassination was supposedly carried out by a man named James Earl Ray. But James Earl Ray never received a jury trial. Even Martin Luther King Jr.'s own family believes that he was not the killer. Martin Luther King Jr.'s son went and visited James Earl Ray in prison and walked away believing him that he was not the killer.
Dexter King arrived at this Nashville prison to meet the man serving time for the death of his father, Dr. Martin Luther King.
Long anticipated visit.
The youngest son wanted to look into the eyes of a terminally ill James Earl Ray and ask one question in particular.
Did you kill my father?
No, I didn't, no.
And then King offered this.
I believe you, and my family believes you.
Dexter King, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Take me back to the moment when you reached out and shook James Earl Ray's hand. What was that like?
It was very moving, a feeling of relief to finally meet face to face with the man who has been accused, but has since, from the beginning, said he was innocent. I continue to hear that he confessed, and in fact, he didn't confess. He pled guilty, which is different, technically speaking.
So when you asked him, did you kill my father, in no uncertain terms, and he said, no, I did not, why do you believe him?
Well, I believe him because there's so much new evidence that has been presented to me and my family vis-a-vis his attorney, Bill Pepper. Also, the fact of the matter is, he has said from the beginning he was innocent. I asked him why he pled guilty. He said basically his attorney at the time cut a deal behind the scenes with the district attorney, and unbeknownst to him, he was forfeiting his rights to a trial. As soon as he found that out, 3 days later, he recanted and has since been trying to get a trial.
So his defense attorney told him this: if you go to trial, you're going to be convicted and you're going to be put to death. Because if he would have been convicted in court, he would have been put to death. So they pressured him and convinced him to plead guilty, and then you won't get the death penalty. You'll get life in prison instead. So that's what he did. 3 days later, he regretted it for the rest of his life, fought to try to get a jury trial. Then Martin Luther King Jr.'s own family fought to try to get him a jury trial, and they wanted him to get that jury trial. He never got the jury trial.
1 week after the meeting, on the eve of the 29th anniversary of the assassination, today's Matt Lauer spoke with Pulitzer Prize-winning King biographer David Garrow.
You said that the scene of James Earl Ray and Dexter King shaking hands was, quote, sad and surreal. Why?
Yes, Matt. I think it's very sad that the King family and the King children are so uninformed of the history that they could be open to believing that Mr. Ray was not involved in Dr. King's assassination.
All right, hang on for 1 second, because joining us now is Dexter King. Dexter, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Mr. Garrow seems to think that you and your family members are being duped by James Earl Ray and his attorneys. What's your reaction?
Well, I am very disturbed by his comments that anyone in this day and age of victims' rights would suggest that it is wrong for a family to question who killed their loved one. The fact of the matter is, I guess I'm really not surprised because Mr. Garrow, for whatever reason, is doing his job, and frankly, he is an agent for those forces of suppression who do not want this truth to come forward.
You say, well, why do you bring that up about James Earl Ray? Why is that relevant? Well, because of the fact that I believe that the reason that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated is because they wanted him to be a martyr that would go down in history with greatness, and if he would have been allowed to continue living, he would have ruined his own reputation because he's going around committing all this filth. And so they figure, we better take this guy out while he's at the top of his game before he gets busted with all the filth and before he does something really stupid that we can't cover for him anymore and we can't have a media blackout anymore. So I think they took him out in order to immortalize him.
President Reagan signed into law a bill today creating a national holiday honoring Martin Luther King. ABC's Sam Donaldson was at the White House.
The White House staged an impressive ceremony today, the President and Dr. King's widow walking into the Rose Garden together in an effort to spruce up Mr. Reagan's tattered civil rights image. The President signed the bill, which he had so strongly opposed, making Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday a national holiday. When it was over, Mrs. King said it had been a great day, and the President's words were fitting. The Reverend Jesse Jackson, who's running for president, said it was not a day for him to criticize anyone.
A national holiday was proclaimed in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. Starting on October 8th, 1983, there were debates on the Senate floor about the King holiday. And let me just point out to you, the word holiday means holy day. That's what holiday means. Do we need a holy day for Martin Luther King Jr.? I mean, does this man sound like he was a holy man? And in these debates, there were, of course, people who brought out all the smut and the filth and all the 64,000 pages that the Senate had received. And then the other side basically just said, well, how dare you run this smear campaign? Just want to ignore the facts of all this filth and smut that was proven by hard evidence. And of course, the King holiday came about. Why? Because of the fact that if you don't like Dr. King, you're a racist. And by the way, if you don't like Obama, you're also a racist. I mean, that's what these people believe, don't they? People will just try to tell you, shut up about Martin Luther King Jr., you vicious racist. I do not have a racist bone in my body. Anyone who knows me can verify that. But yet you're called a racist for criticizing Obama, for criticizing Martin Luther King Jr. We're just judging people on the content of their character, folks. Right. Nothing to do with color. People who don't have any facts want to make it about color and play that race card. Yeah. Now listen, I grew up in Christian school. And I went to a lot of different Christian schools, Baptist schools, and none of them ever gave us the day off for Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and we never complained about it one time. Because our parents taught us that that holiday was something that we do not observe as Christians because he was a wicked, false prophet, and an adulterer, and a communist. And when I was growing up, Martin Luther King Jr. was known in my house as Marxist Lucifer King. That's how he was referred to in my house. Marxist because he was a communist. Lucifer because he was of the devil. The Bible says that Satan's ministers are transformed into ministers of light.
And no marvel, Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works.
But today, even Baptists, even Christians have been so brainwashed by TV and media that they exalt this man whom they know nothing about just because everybody else is doing it. And the Bible says, they that forsake the law praise the wicked, but such as keep the law contend with them. Now you say, Pastor Anderson, what's the message of the sermon? What are we going to do next Monday? What's the celebration? You know